Okay, so to start creating a graphical user interface, a GUI, all we need is a few lines of code, in fact. So this first example just creates a window that we can then apply elements to, widgets to. So there's 4 lines of code. You just import all the bits of Tkinter, create the window using this tk function, and then give it a title. So here, call it comp1753 GUI. And then you always have a main loop. The reason you have a loop is that, first of all, that will get the window to appear. So that's essential. Window, by the way, will look like this, so there's nothing in it. But the loop is processing events that events will happen when the user presses a button or types some stuff in the text field or something like that. So we have a loop that we don't need to know about how the loop deals with events, but we need to start the loop up. Okay, let's put some information on our GUI. So labels are the most basic thing. Just contain some text, although you can put images in labels. And to create a widget, often you use some code like this. So you create the thing that you want. So in here, I've called it LBL for label. We have a function that creates it, and these are technically speaking, these are known as objects that we're creating using a class called label. We haven't got to that stage yet, and we won't in this course, but that's why it's in capital letters. So label in capital letters, and then we tell it where it's going to appear, so in the window, or what it's attached to, strictly speaking, and what the label is going to say. So it's going to say hello. It's quite common to abbreviate these variable names. So label is LBL, BTN is button, etc. And then that adds it to the window. We also need to tell it where to go. So we use there's various layout managers you can use, but here we're going to use the grid manager. So we're going to put it right at the beginning in column 0, row 0. So we've got rows and columns in our user interface toolbox, and we're going to put it right at the top. Okay, there are, as I said, there's various geometry managers you can use. So grid, pack, and place. I think the easiest one is the grid, because you can imagine a grid, and it usually produces nice layouts. So you can control the position of everything on your GUI just by saying what row and what column it's in. It's an imaginary rectangle consisting of cells. As I said, they're identified by their row and column number, and we create the layout by placing the widgets in the cells. So you can either put them in an individual cell, or sometimes that's going to look a bit weird because you might have a very wide one with a narrow one underneath. So actually, you want to span consecutive columns, or sometimes even consecutive rows. So you can specify all that when you're putting it in. We'll see some examples of that later. And then each row, and you don't have to control the position, the actual position. You're saying whereabouts on the GUI it's going to go, and then a Tkinter will work out what's the widest thing in that row, in that column, what's the tallest thing in the row, and then position all the other elements accordingly. So rows and columns are not necessarily equally spaced because they expand or contract to fit the objects that are placed in them. We'll see examples of that shortly. Okay, so here we're including the label, just 2 extra lines of code, and then when we run it, actually what happens, the window then contracts to fit this one row and one column that we've got, and there's our label appearing in the middle of the GUI. Okay, because the row shrinks to fit the widget height, we can of course change the size. There's lots of ways of doing that. We can set the window size, or we can set the size by changing the font size. We could make it bigger label, or we can set the height and width of the widget, or we can create padding around each widget. So there's lots of things we'll do. We'll see some examples about setting font size, for example, and setting padding. But let's have a look at those. So here, in this example, the third example, we set the geometry here. So 350 by 200, so it's 350 wide by 200. There it is. Bit wider, and the label, then we can set the font. This is a very big font, so we said it's a bold font and 50 point font, so it's quite large, and again it goes in the the row and column. So you can see then the label actually expands to fit the space that's available for it, which is this 350 by 200. So there's lots of, you know, you can spend a lot of time controlling it, but this is something you probably wouldn't do till right at the very end of building your GUI, because you want to get all the elements on there and then do the, you know, the final finishing touches to the design. Okay, let's finish that video there, and then we'll move on to look at some other elements.